That's right. Yeah, so hello, Susan. It's lovely to have a chance to chat to you about this because, I mean, I'm quite new to Woodlanders, but you were the one that got me involved in the first place. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about what you've been doing. And I guess my first question is how long you've been volunteering for the Woodlanders group.
Well, I joined in early May 2020, soon after lockdown started. Before then, I'd been doing a lot of outdoor projects in the Chilterns, but with lockdown coming, I wanted something inside to do indoors. And another reason is my grandfather's family all came from the central Chilterns area. They were lace makers, woodsmen, and millers. And here is my 4 times great grandfather. And he was a duck breeder of Aylesbury, and his wife was a lace maker. And my mother remembers being taken to lace making relatives when she was very young. And so I thought it'd be very interesting to know more about their lives. Yeah.
Yes,
I have
that's
here an old cushion, lace cushion. I'm not sure if it was made locally, it was bought locally. And I just thought it's so fine. And knowing that a lot of my ancestors were lace makers, what a marvelous thing to know about.
Oh, definitely. But I know when you contacted me, it was because you'd found me as a beader
Yeah.
living locally and wondered if I had any connection with what you're now researching a lot, which is something called tambour beading. So, I mean, how did you end up moving from the lace to the tambour beading interest?
Well, the first project I did for Woodlanders was with a man called Thomas Gilbert, who was a lace dealer of High Wycombe. And in the 1860s, he had 3,000 local lace makers working for him. By 1876, he became bankrupt because the hand lace making industry collapsed. And he and his family, and also many of the lace makers working for him, all moved over to Beading. And in the Holmer Green area, which was an area just north of between Wycombe and Misselden, they moved over to become specialist Tambour beaders. And
Okay.
here, if I share the screen, I will show you some pictures of the
What is tambour beading? Obviously, I've discovered this now, but I'm sure a lot of people watching this probably won't know.
sorry, you'll have to edit this. This is the next collection. Tambour beading is the technique of using a small tambour hook to sew beads, which are usually glass, and sequins onto panels of fine material, originally lace, but other materials eventually, which are used to be sewn onto dresses, high-end, high-fashion dresses for London dressmakers, for for royalty, for stage stars initially, then film and TV, and also I think the original Come Dancing ladies' dresses were sewn by them. It's very specialist work. The designs would be sent down from London by and handed out to the ladies who here's an example of some tambour beading that was done locally by the grandmother of one of our volunteers. Do you see there's there's a paper pattern that they're provided with, and there's a tambour hook, and here are the beads and sequins sewn into the pattern. Here is another example by a beaded shawl from Holmer Green. One of the Woodlands volunteers is wearing it, and that's actually in Amersham Museum. So it was very ornate and distinctive work. The ladies worked in a place, they either worked in a hut on Holmer Green or they worked in their own homes so that they could combine it with family looking after their families. Here is a picture of some of the ladies from Holmer Green. And here are some more ladies from Fitch Factory who took it over later. And here's more of the girls. So so I was interested to see how it started, and then in the Holmer Green area, and then very soon mothers were handing it on to their daughters and daughter-in-laws, and local girls became agents for it and really were quite entrepreneurial. It was a big skill, and it brought in good money for them. And yet by the 1970s, it had more or less died out. It's now being taught again in London embroidery schools, and high-end fashion companies still use it in dresses a lot, but very little is known about the lives of the women who did this. And that's what I thought would be interesting to know what it was like, and find photographs of them. We have traced some of them through their daughters and descendants through Facebook, and we're asking them for their memories. So it's really interesting, all that skill, and now we're recovering it.
Yes, it's absolutely fascinating and just wonderful to see all those photos. I mean, obviously, of the actual samples, you can see how intricate it all must have been. But just lovely to see the photos of the ladies who were doing it. You know, you get that real connection. It's real life women's history, lives that were important, and really sad that that's getting lost and we don't know so much about it. So yes, I can see this has been absolutely fascinating to research, and I'm guessing it's been a lovely way to help you through lockdown, because I mean, obviously the last year has not been easy for anybody. But this sounds like a wonderful project to have had to enjoy.
Yes, it has been. I think it's just fascinating, finding out how much you can find out about their lives, and basically how things turned up. They must have lived through such times of social change with, in the 1860s, so many women were making their money out of lace making, but within a decade it had gone, and they all had to find something else to do. And they were very, very skilled.
Yes.
And they're proud of what they produce. You know, you can find records that in the local WI that afterwards they're saying, you know, our designs were worn by royalty, and that must be so nice.
Yes. Imagine, I know I've had an interview where they were talking about, you know, a lady who had actually worked on the Queen's wedding dress, and of course that was about probably the first wedding to be televised. So imagine watching that and going, I made that bit. So, I mean, it must have been wonderful. Yeah, really, really exciting project.
And I think that any project like this, a regular project where you're doing research and sharing it with other people, is very good in lockdown, because you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing something that hopefully people will find interesting, and in fact we know that people are finding interesting. So it's been a great pleasure.
Yes, well, I mean, certainly from my perspective, just discovering that there's this huge ancestry of women who were doing the craft that uses the beads that I use is amazing. I had no idea, and yeah, definitely something that we want to retrieve and celebrate, and not end up getting lost in history. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to get a little glimpse into what you've been doing over the past year, and really looking forward to seeing more coming out of the project, and, you know, bringing out more of these wonderful women's lives in the future. So thank you.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and it's been a great pleasure finding out how much you know about the beading and bringing the beading and lacing together. I think, you know, in the back, seeing both sides of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting because when I've taught previously, I've taught a lot of people who've got into beading and also have an interest in lace making. So it seems even today, those two crafts somehow go hand in hand, which is, it's fascinating now putting that in the context of the history that's gone before. That's, I got an email from you, Susan. Just actually, you'd found me online because you were doing the Tambour beading research, and my website had literally come up as beading, and that I lived in the Chilterns. So I remember getting the email to ask whether I knew anything about Tambour beading, whether I had any sort of local links to the Chilterns. And it was an absolute revelation to me to discover that there is this huge history of beadwork in the area in which I now live. But I'm sad to say I have absolutely no natural links whatsoever. For starters, the tambour beading, and I know it's not just tambour beading, I know you've also been finding different styles of beading coming up in the archive records, but all of them are quite related to bead embroidery, which is something I've done a little of, but not my main beading. My main bead, the beading that I do, is something called bead weaving, which involves just using needle and thread to stitch the individual glass beads together. So you can make jewelry. I mean, this is a piece I've made. You can make three-dimensional objects. You can do pretty much anything with it, but it is just thread and beads, no material involved. Whereas the bead embroidery rather, is about stitching beads onto material backings. So in the tambour beading, as I went on to discover, that's, very thin fabrics like lace or tulle or netting. But there's all sorts of other techniques that you might use on fabrics like, satins or silks or whatever. So yes, that isn't my current area of expertise. And I also, although I have grown up in the Chilterns, my family actually all originates in Cornwall. So I have absolutely no relation to any of the, as it turns out, many deans that live in the local area. Yeah. But nevertheless, aside from the beading, I actually did my original university degree in history. So something in your requests went, this sounds fascinating. So it's a chance to go back to a bit of history, a bit of research, and of course with my modern love for beading. So that's how come I got to be here really only a few weeks ago. Yeah. I know about you. I mean, what got you involved in the volunteer project to start with?
I was retired. I did a lot of voluntary work outdoors in the Chilterns, but after lockdown, I needed to do something indoors. And I've always traced my family history. And this man behind is my 4 times great grandfather, who was a duck breeder, and his wife was a lace maker. And I've also got an old lace cushion here. And I thought, I'd read about the Woodlanders project, which was discovering the lives of lace makers in the Chilterns. And I thought, I'd love to do that. I'd love to know more about them and use online research skills, which I have, in order to find out more about their lives. And although you can learn a lot about their lives, you can't really recapture the feel, what it must have felt like them living through a time of such social change. I mean, and it just somehow brought it all to life, and finding out the patterns that they worked on, how they worked, how they made their money, and just made it so much more vivid than just seeing the census records of how many children they had and where they lived. You can get a feel maybe for what they spent their days doing, whether they, what skills they had, because a lot of them were very, very skilled hand workers. The work's beautiful. And
yes.
the country cottages, and for not a lot of money, and it's being sold at great expense in London. So I think it's very interesting to see that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm just finding my way into, I mean, there's obviously a lot of research already being carried out, um, but also the online resources, they're not the same resources that I was used to using back when I was doing my degree. I was more involved in libraries and rare books, and I mean, it was actually a completely different area of history. So yeah, as I said, I've really only been volunteering for a few weeks, and I'm trying to find my way around what's been done, what can be done, and sort of find a niche that I want to research, because I feel like we've got this wonderful freedom to follow our own interests, and obviously for you, you've got the family interest there, and I think it sort of works quite nicely if you can find something specific, a specific question that you want to try and answer. And then we've got all that information there to try and, like you say, create a picture of what was happening in these people's lives all those years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's been a marvellous project. And when you see how many people turn up on the Zoom calls each month, you can see how people doing really detailed research, you can see how much it's added, how much pleasure is brought to people. So I think I highly recommend people with time on their hands and interest and love of the Chilterns or handicrafts or their ancestors' lives to join us.
Yes, I couldn't put it better. It is wonderful, and yeah, lovely to have those monthly get-togethers where we see what everyone else is doing and seeing the amazing research that's been done on the census records. So we're getting, data that others can use and manipulate and answer different questions they may have. It's yeah, really, I'm very glad that I've discovered the project, or you discovered me, and
Well,
yeah.
it's been a great pleasure.